Nope, still dead. Frank, a man whose physique suggested a long and intimate relationship with both heavy machinery and bacon, delivered the verdict with the grim finality of a coroner calling time of death. He flicked the useless power switch for the circular saw again. Silence. The only sound in my new, blessedly empty garage was the slow, rhythmic drip, drip, drip of sweat falling from my nose onto the pristine concrete floor. My pristine and very expensive concrete floor. This was it. T-0. The day my life was supposed to pivot from guy who lives in a glorified shoebox with questionable plumbing to sophisticated homeowner with a server rack and a smart fridge that can probably judge my life choices. For months, I'd been living on a diet of ramen noodles and pure, unadulterated ambition. I'd saved every penny, sold a kidney, metaphorically mostly, and endured countless hours of YouTube tutorials with titles like Crimping Cat 6 for End 00 BS to prepare for this moment. Today, my humble suburban abode was scheduled to undergo its technological apotheosis. We were talking a full-blown smart home conversion, a centralized home server that would make the NSA jealous, and enough Ethernet cable to lasso the moon. It was the culmination of a dream that was currently being held hostage by a grid failure. "Look, Alex," Frank began, his voice a low rumble of gravel and pragmatism. He wiped a beefy forearm across his brow, leaving a streak of grime. "I love your enthusiasm, I really do. But my guys and we can't exactly plug our gear into your winning personality. The meter's running, and right now, all we're doing is making your floor sweaty." His two-man crew, a pair of lanky guys named Dave and the other one, nodded in solemn agreement. They looked like they were attending a funeral for my bank account. And they were. Frank's company, Wired Up, was the best in the state. They were also priced accordingly. Every tick of the clock was another dollar bill catching fire on the pyre of my ambitions. Just give it a few minutes," I pleaded, the words tasting like desperation. "It's probably just a transformer or something. A squirrel got ambitious. It'll be back on in a sec." Frank gave me a look that said, "Bless your sweet, naive, city boy heart." I retreated into the house, my bare feet sticking to the hardwood floors. The air was already thick and still, the oppressive July heat seeping in through the double-paned windows. My phone, thankfully at 87%, was my only lifeline. I pulled it out and stared at the home screen, a picture of a pristine server rack humming with blue and green lights. It was my vision board, my North Star. Right now, it felt like a cruel joke. As I stood there, stewing in a potent cocktail of humidity and despair, I glanced out the front window. My house was at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac on a street named, without a hint of irony, Serenity Lane. Every lawn was a perfect emerald green carpet. Every flower bed was a riot of color, artfully arranged. Every mailbox stood at attention like a tiny, dutiful soldier. It was the kind of neighborhood that probably had a city ordinance against mismatched socks. And that's when I saw her. Across the street, in the window of the beige house with the aggressively cheerful pink flamingos, a curtain twitched. A face, framed by a helmet of perfectly coiffed blonde hair, peered out. I'd seen her before, of course. She was the neighborhood's unofficial watchtower. I'd mentally nicknamed her the Suburban Sentinel. We'd exchanged a brisk, tight-lipped wave once, an exchange that felt less like a greeting and more like she was logging my existence into a database of potential threats. She held my gaze for a fraction of a second too long before the curtain fell back into place. A shiver, completely unrelated to the temperature, trickled down my spine. I shook it off. Paranoia. I was just stressed. This was my new life. Quiet, peaceful, full of polite, curtain-twitching neighbors. What could possibly go wrong? 20 minutes later, everything had gone wrong. My call to the power company had been an exercise in futility, a journey through a 7-circle-of-hell automated phone system that ended with a bored-sounding representative named Brenda telling me, "We are aware of a localized outage in your area and have dispatched a crew. We do not have an estimated time for restoration." "Brenda, listen to me," I'd said, trying to inject a note of calm urgency into my voice. "I have a team of very expensive contractors standing in my garage, currently being paid to do absolutely nothing. Can you please define localized?" "Sir, it appears to be affecting your block," she'd replied, the sound of her typing punctuated by the occasional slurp of what I could only assume was a giant soda. "And can you define crew?" I'd pressed. "Is it one guy in a pickup truck, or is it a team of highly trained electrical ninjas who will descend from the heavens and bless us with sweet, sweet amperage?" There was a pause. "Sir, we have dispatched a crew." Click. Brenda had left the building. I relayed the non-update to Frank, who had already begun methodically packing up his tools. The sound of a drill being placed back into its case felt like a nail being hammered into my financial coffin. "That's it, kid. We're calling it," he announced. "We'll try again Monday. The rescheduling fee is in the contract." Panic, sharp and cold, seized me. The rescheduling fee alone was more than my last car was worth. "Wait, Frank, hold on. Let me just go look. Maybe I can see what's going on." He shrugged, a gesture that conveyed both pity and an unwavering commitment to his own bottom line. "Suit yourself. You got 10 minutes. Then we're ghosts." I burst out of my front door and into the thick, soupy air of a Midwest summer afternoon. The sun was a merciless hammer in a cloudless sky. The silence on the street was eerie. No hum of air conditioners, no distant drone of a lawnmower. It was like the whole world was holding its breath. Then I saw it. Hope. It was parked about 100 yards down the street, right at the mouth of the cul-de-sac. A big, white utility truck, its yellow lights flashing in a lazy, rhythmic pulse. A crew! Brenda hadn't been lying. A grin split my face. I broke into a jog, my flip-flops slapping against the hot asphalt. "Yes, yes, yes, yes," I muttered under my breath. The electrical ninjas had arrived, but as I got closer, my triumphant jog slowed to a confused walk. There was a problem. The truck was parked, but no one was working. 2 men in bright yellow vests and hard hats were standing near a chain-link fence that enclosed a small, drab, concrete building. It was a power substation, the anonymous brick box that powered our little corner of suburban paradise. And standing between the men and the gate, like a bulldog guarding a stake, was the suburban sentinel. My neighbor. Her arms were crossed, her feet were planted, and her face was set in a mask of intractable indignation. She was in the middle of a lecture, her voice carrying clearly in the unnatural quiet. "I don't know how things work in the city," she was saying, her tone dripping with condescension. "But here on Serenity Lane, we have rules. This is property of the Homeowners Association. You cannot simply open a gate without prior authorization." One of the utility workers, a young guy with a sunburned neck, sighed audibly. "Ma'am, with all due respect, we're with the utility company. The whole block's power is out. We need to get into the substation to fix it." "And I need you to respect our bylaws," she shot back, completely unfazed. "A formal request must be submitted to the board 72 hours in advance. It's in the covenants, Section 4, Subsection B, Paragraph 3, for the safety and security of our community." I stopped dead in my tracks, my brain struggling to process the sheer, unadulterated absurdity of the scene. The fate of my incredibly expensive smart home installation, the very flow of electrons to an entire neighborhood, was being held up by a woman who was quoting a rule book at the people who control the magic lightning. This wasn't just a power outage, it was a hostage situation, and the hostage was my wallet. I took a deep breath, plastered what I hoped was a friendly, non-threatening smile on my face, and walked into the lion's den. "Hi there," I said, aiming for a tone of breezy neighborliness. "Everything okay over here?" The woman turned her head, her eyes, the color of icy disdain, sweeping over me. Up close, she was even more formidable. Her blonde hair was a marvel of engineering, a solid, unmoving helmet of aerosol and determination. She wore a pastel pink tracksuit that looked both comfortable and vaguely judgmental. "I have the situation under control," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. She dismissed me with a flick of her eyes and turned back to the beleaguered utility workers. "Ma'am," the older worker said, his patience clearly hanging by a thread. "This is an emergency. We have a legal right to access our equipment. And I have a right to protect this community from unauthorized personnel," she retorted. "For all I know, you could be casing the neighborhood." My jaw went slack. Casing the neighborhood? They were in a truck that was roughly the size of a blue whale, emblazoned with the power company's logo on all sides. It was the worst getaway vehicle in human history. "I'm Alex," I said, stepping forward again and extending a hand that she completely ignored. "I live just down there. The house with the very stressed-out owner. My power is out too. My contractors are about to leave." She finally deigned to look at me again. "You're the new one, in the Miller house." It wasn't a question. "I'm Carol," she announced, as if revealing her name was a great honor. "And I am the president of the Serenity Lane Homeowners Association. And, as I was explaining to these gentlemen before you interrupted, our bylaws are very clear." "But it's an emergency," I stammered, my friendly facade beginning to crack. "Surely there's an exception for, the entire neighborhood being plunged into the Dark Ages?" Carol smiled, a thin, bloodless slash that didn't reach her eyes. "Rules are what separate us from the animals, young man. If we make an exception for this, what's next? People parking on the grass? Garbage cans left out after 7 p.m.? It's a slippery slope." I looked at the utility guys. They had the defeated, hollow-eyed look of men who had fought this exact battle 1,000 times before. They were bound by corporate policy not to engage, not to escalate. They were powerless. And that's when I understood. Carol wasn't just a stickler for the rules. She was drunk on the minuscule amount of power her HOA title afforded her. This wasn't about safety or security. This was about the thrill of saying no. The joy of being the one person who could bring everything to a halt. She was a petty tyrant, and her kingdom was this quiet, manicured cul-de-sac. I felt a surge of something hot and unfamiliar in my chest. It was a righteous, incandescent rage. My dream, my money, my sanity. It was all being sacrificed at the altar of this woman's power trip. Diplomacy was dead on arrival. Reason had been laughed out of the room. My 10 minutes were almost up. Fine. If she wanted to play by the rules, we'd play by the rules. But I was about to find a bigger rule book. I gave her my most accommodating smile. "You know what, Carol? You're absolutely right. Rules are important." I turned to the utility workers. "Sorry to have bothered you fellas." I turned and walked away, feeling her smug, victorious gaze on my back. She had no idea what was coming. She thought she was the gatekeeper. She was about to find out she was just the person standing in front of the gate when the bulldozer arrived. Walking back to my house was the longest 100-yard walk of my life. Each step on the scorching asphalt was a reminder of my utter and complete failure as a negotiator. I had tried to be the nice guy, the reasonable neighbor, the voice of compromise. And in return, I'd been condescended to, dismissed, and schooled on the finer points of a rule book written by people with too much time on their hands. Frank was standing by his truck, the back doors already closed and latched. The other two were in the cab, no doubt enjoying the last vestiges of the truck's air conditioning. "No dice, huh?" Frank asked, though his expression made it clear he already knew the answer. "There's a woman," I said, the words coming out in a strangled gasp. "An HOA Karen of the highest order. A final boss of suburban bureaucracy. She's blocked the gate to the substation. She's quoting bylaws at them." Frank actually chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound. "Ah, a Carol. Every neighborhood's got one. Well, kid, looks like you're out of luck. We'll see you Monday morning. Try to have the power on by then." He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that was probably meant to be comforting, but felt more like he was checking for a pulse, and turned to get into his truck. "Wait!" I yelled, a new desperate energy surging through me. "Don't leave yet, just give me 5 more minutes. I have an idea." Frank paused, his hand on the door handle. He looked at my face, at the sweat and the wild-eyed desperation, and saw something that must have intrigued him. Maybe it was the glint of madness. Maybe it was the promise of a good show. "5 minutes," he said, pulling a well-worn watch from his pocket. "Starting now." I didn't waste a second. I sprinted back into my house, my mind a whirlwind of legalese and righteous fury. My laptop was on the kitchen counter, its screen dark. I jabbed the power button. Nothing. Of course, the battery was dead. My phone was my only weapon. 72% battery. It would have to do. I fumbled with the device, my sweaty fingers slipping on the screen. A few months ago, when I was in the throes of closing on the house, my lawyer had sent me a link to a secure online portal containing every single document related to the purchase. The deed, the title report, the inspection results, and, most importantly, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions. The HOA's holy scripture. I had downloaded all of it to a cloud drive. A digital mountain of PDFs that I had skimmed but never truly appreciated. Until now. I navigated to the drive, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. There it was, a folder labeled Closing Docs. I opened it and began scrolling, my eyes scanning for one specific phrase. It had to be there. It was standard in almost every property deed in the country. And then I saw it. Tucked away in a dense, 20-page document titled Declaration of Easements was a paragraph that made my heart sing. A perpetual and exclusive easement is hereby granted to Public Utility Company, its successors and assigns, for the installation, operation, maintenance, repair, and removal of utility infrastructure. Said easement includes the unrestricted right of ingress and egress at all times for the purposes of performing emergency repairs. Unrestricted right of ingress and egress. Unrestricted, that was the magic word. It was a legal sledgehammer, and I was about to use it to smash Carol's little gate of bylaws into splinters. My 5 minutes were almost up. I had the ammunition. Now I just needed to call in the airstrike. My hands were shaking as I dialed the power company's number again. The familiar, soul-crushing hold music started up. A tinny, synthesized version of a song that was probably a hit in the 80s. I paced my dark living room like a caged animal. "Come on, Brenda. Don't fail me now." "Thank you for holding. This is Kevin. How can I help you?" A new voice. Good. Kevin sounded younger, more energetic. Less likely to be slurping a big gulp. "Kevin, my man, listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice low and urgent. "My name is Alex Miller. I live at 12 Serenity Lane. I called about 20 minutes ago about a power outage. I need to speak to a supervisor. Immediately." "Sir, our supervisors are very busy." "Kevin, I am standing here looking at your crew. They are being actively and physically obstructed from accessing the substation by a resident. This is no longer a customer service issue. This is a public safety issue. I let the keywords hang in the air. Actively obstructed. Public safety. These were the phrases that bypassed the script. There was a flurry of typing on the other end. "Obstructed, sir? Can you elaborate?" "I can," I said, a grim satisfaction creeping into my voice. "The president of our homeowners association, a woman named Carol, is physically blocking the gate. She's refusing to move and is quoting her little HOA rulebook at your team. I am currently looking at a copy of the legally filed utility easement for this property, which, as I'm sure you know, grants your company unrestricted access in an emergency. Your team is being illegally prevented from performing their duties." Silence. Sweet, beautiful silence. I could picture Kevin's eyes widening as he scanned his monitor. I had gone from being another annoying customer to a valuable asset, an on-the-ground source with crucial intel. "Sir," Kevin said, his voice now crisp and professional, "can you confirm the individual is still there and still refusing to allow access?" "Affirmative, Kevin. She's dug in like a tick, and I've got contractors here who are about to charge me a rescheduling fee that could fund a small nation for a year. The clock is ticking." "Please hold, sir. Do not hang up." I was put on hold, but this time the music didn't come back on. I heard muffled voices, a sense of urgency in the background. My heart was a drum solo in my chest. This was it. The point of no return. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 30 seconds, a new voice came on the line. It was a woman's voice, calm, authoritative, and utterly devoid of nonsense. "Mr. Miller, this is Joan, the regional dispatch supervisor. I understand you have a visual on our crew?" "That's right, Joan. I've got a front-row seat to the dumbest standoff in history." "And you have a resident who is obstructing them?" "Like a concrete wall in a pink tracksuit." "And you have a copy of the utility easement?" "I've got it open on my phone right now. Unrestricted ingress and egress. It's beautiful, Joan. It's poetry." A faint, dry chuckle came down the line. "Thank you for the clarification, Mr. Miller. We have a zero-tolerance policy for obstruction of emergency services. I am rerouting a senior line supervisor and a secondary crew to your location. I am also notifying the local police department to provide assistance." My eyes widened. The police? I hadn't even considered that. This was escalating faster than I could have imagined. "Excellent," I managed to say. "They are coming in hot, Mr. Miller," Joan said, and I could hear the grim satisfaction in her voice. "ETA is 3 minutes. Can you do me a favor and be present when they arrive?" "Joan," I said, a wide, manic grin spreading across my face, "I wouldn't miss it for the world." I walked out of my house feeling like a general about to watch his master plan unfold. Frank was still there, leaning against his truck, arms crossed, his 5-minute deadline long since passed. He raised an eyebrow at me. "You look like the cat that ate the canary," he said. "The canary, Frank," I replied, my grin widening, "was blocking access to the substation, and I just called in the eagles." Before he could ask me what the hell that meant, a faint, distant siren began to wail. It grew louder, closer, joined by a second, deeper siren. A low rumble vibrated through the asphalt. At the far end of the street, a convoy appeared. It wasn't just one truck, it was a parade of municipal might. Leading the charge was a massive, gleaming white bucket truck, its yellow lights strobing in a hypnotic rhythm. Behind it was another large utility truck, a beast of a vehicle with compartments and cranes. And behind that was a black supervisor's SUV, its lights flashing with an urgent, important rhythm. They turned onto Serenity Lane, not with the caution of visitors, but with the focused intensity of an invading army. They rolled down the street, their diesel engines a thunderous roar that shattered the suburban silence. Neighbors started peeking out of their doors, their placid Friday afternoon suddenly interrupted by a show of force usually reserved for natural disasters. The convoy screeched to a halt, forming a formidable semicircle around Carol and the two beleaguered utility workers. Doors flew open. A team of grim-faced men in hard hats and steel-toed boots emerged, and from the supervisor's SUV stepped a man who was clearly in charge. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a neatly trimmed gray beard and an expression that could curdle milk from 50 paces. He held a clipboard like it was a weapon. This, I presumed, was Mr. Henderson. I began my stroll down the street, timing my arrival for maximum dramatic effect. Frank and his crew were now standing in my driveway, their mouths slightly agape, watching the scene unfold. Carol was momentarily stunned by the overwhelming response. Her smug composure faltered. She looked from the massive trucks to the stern-faced men, her brain clearly struggling to compute this new reality. Mr. Henderson strode right up to her, his boots crunching on the asphalt. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He got straight to the point. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low, commanding baritone. "I'm the area supervisor for the utility company. I've been informed that you are preventing my crew from accessing this substation." Carol, recovering her wits, puffed up her chest. "I am simply enforcing the HOA bylaws, which you are clearly violating with this outrageous display." She waved a hand at the assembled trucks. Mr. Henderson didn't even glance at them. His eyes were locked on her. "Ma'am, this is an emergency power outage. Under state law and the legally filed utility easement that governs this piece of land, your HOA bylaws are completely and utterly irrelevant. You are illegally obstructing a public utility, which is a misdemeanor offense. Now, you have two choices. You can step aside, or my next call will be to the police department, and they can explain the finer points of criminal law to you from the back of their patrol car." It was a beautiful, perfectly delivered speech, a masterwork of bureaucratic smackdown. I arrived at the edge of the scene just in time to hear Carol's sputtering response. "How dare you! This is harassment! I'm calling the police myself!" she shrieked, fumbling for her phone. Mr. Henderson allowed himself a small, cold smile. "Don't bother," he said. Just as a new siren, the familiar yelp of a police cruiser joined the chorus. "I already did." A black and white police car swung around the corner and pulled up behind the supervisor's SUV. Its arrival was the cherry on top of this beautiful Sunday of escalating consequences. The flashing red and blue lights painted the scene in strokes of officialdom and imminent justice. Two officers emerged. The first, Officer Miller, was older, with a weary, seen-it-all-before slump to his shoulders. The second, Officer Davis, was younger, fitter, with a crisp uniform and an air of tired professionalism. They surveyed the scene, the fleet of utility trucks, the crowd of hard-hatted men, and the furiously indignant woman in the pink tracksuit, with a collective, unspoken sigh. "Having a party, folks?" Officer Miller asked, his voice dry as a bone. Carol surged forward, seeing the officers as her saviors. "Officers? Thank goodness you're here. Arrest these men. They are trespassing on private HOA property and threatening me." Officer Miller held up a hand, a gesture that universally meant, "Please, for the love of God, stop talking." He ambled over to Mr. Henderson, completely ignoring Carol. "Henderson?" he said, the single word conveying a long history of dealing with municipal headaches. "What's the situation?" "The usual, Miller," Mr. Henderson replied, tapping his clipboard. "Emergency outage. Need to access the sub. This lady seems to think her HOA rulebook trumps state and federal law." Miller glanced over at his partner, who was trying very hard to maintain a neutral expression. I was close enough to hear Miller mutter under his breath, "Oh, great. Another bylaw baroness." Officer Davis stepped forward and addressed Carol directly, his voice polite but firm. "Ma'am, is there a problem here?" It was the opening Carol had been waiting for. She launched into a breathless, high-pitched tirade about her rights, her authority as HOA president, the disrespect she had been shown, the bylaws, the covenants, the sacred honor of Serenity Lane. It was a magnificent performance, a true area of entitlement. The officer listened with the kind of practiced patience that only comes from years of dealing with the public. When she finally paused to take a breath, he didn't even flinch. He simply turned his head back to Mr. Henderson. "They need to get in?" he asked. Mr. Henderson nodded. "They do." Officer Davis turned his full attention back to Carol. The politeness was still there, but now it had a steel edge. "Ma'am, you've heard the supervisor. You need to step aside and let these men do their work. Right now." Carol's face went from pink to a deep, blotchy red. "I will not! I know my rights! You can't make me—" Officer Miller let out a deep, soul-weary sigh, the sigh of a man who has contemplated early retirement at least 5 times that day. He stepped forward, his hand resting casually on his belt, near his handcuffs. "Ma'am," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Here are your options. Option A, you walk over to your perfectly manicured lawn and you stand there quietly while these gentlemen restore power to the neighborhood. Option B, you continue to stand here, and I place you under arrest for obstructing a government function, after which you will take a ride in the back of my car, which, I can assure you, does not have the same pleasant aroma as your flower beds. The choice is entirely yours." The threat, so calmly and simply delivered, finally penetrated Carol's bubble of self-righteousness. Her eyes darted from the officer's implacable face to the handcuffs on his belt. The reality of the situation crashed down on her. This was not a board meeting. These were not disgruntled neighbors she could intimidate with fines. This was the law. Her shoulders slumped. The fight went out of her. Defeated, she muttered something about lawsuits and calling her lawyer, but there was no heat behind it. She turned, shot me a look of pure, unadulterated venom, and trudged over to her lawn. She immediately whipped out her phone and began recording, providing a low, bitter commentary to an audience of no one. Mr. Henderson nodded once to the officers. "Appreciate it, Miller." "Just another day in paradise," Miller grumbled. He and his partner got back in their car, but they didn't leave. They just sat there, a silent, watchful presence ensuring the peace. With Carol neutralized, the utility crew sprang into action. One of them produced a massive bolt cutter and, with a satisfying snap, severed the flimsy padlock on the gate. The gates to the substation swung open. The electrical ninjas had breached the fortress. The moment the gate was open, it was like watching a pit crew at the Indy 500. The utility team, now unhindered, moved with a swift and practiced efficiency. They swarmed the small concrete building, shouting jargon at each other and moving with a purpose that was awe-inspiring. Less than 5 minutes later, a loud, satisfying clunk echoed from within the substation. And just like that, the world came back to life. A collective sigh of relief seemed to ripple through the neighborhood as air conditioners whirred back on. From inside my house, I heard the faint, cheerful beep of my microwave resetting its clock. It was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The senior crew packed up as quickly as they had arrived. Mr. Henderson walked over to me, his stern expression having softened into something approaching amusement. "Looks like your problem is solved, Mr. Miller," he said. "I can't thank you enough, Mr. Henderson," I replied, shaking his offered hand. "You and your team are miracle workers." "Nah," he said with a wry smile. "We just fix things. It's the people who try to stop us that are the real mystery. You might want to watch your back, though. That one looks like she holds a grudge. He nodded towards Carol, who was still standing on her lawn like a statue of resentment, her phone held aloft. I'll take my chances, I said. The convoy of trucks rumbled back to life and pulled away, leaving a sudden, blessed quiet in their wake. The police car gave a final, parting chirp of its siren and followed them out. The show was over. I practically floated back to my house. Frank and his crew were standing exactly where I'd left them, looking utterly dumbfounded. Kid, Frank said, shaking his head in disbelief. I have been doing this job for 25 years. I have seen some things, but I have never seen anything like that. What in the hell did you say to them on the phone? I just read them the rules, Frank, I said with a grin. The real rules. A newfound respect gleamed in his eyes. He and his crew got back to work with a vigor they hadn't possessed before. And by 5 o'clock, my house was no longer just a house. It was a smart house. The server rack in my office was humming contentedly, its little blue and green lights blinking like a tiny city at night. My thermostat was set, my lights responded to my voice, and my digital fortress of solitude was complete. As Frank's truck finally pulled away for the last time, I stood in my driveway, bathed in the golden light of the late afternoon, feeling a profound sense of victory. I had faced the beast and won. I had brought light to the darkness, both literally and figuratively. I had, for one brief, shining moment, been the hero of my own story. I went inside, cracked open a cold beer, and toasted myself. To Alex, I said to my empty living room, the man who fought the HOA and won. I was so naive. I thought the battle was over. In reality, the war had just begun. I woke up the next morning feeling like a king. The air conditioning was humming a gentle lullaby. The coffee maker had started automatically at 7 a.m., and the world was, for the first time in a long time, exactly as it should be. I put on some music through the new whole-home audio system and did a little victory dance in my kitchen. My triumphant mood lasted until I opened my front door to grab the morning paper I hadn't ordered, but was apparently delivered to every house. Taped to my door, fluttering in the gentle morning breeze, were 5 official-looking envelopes. Each one bore the crisp, professional logo of the Serenity Lane Homeowners Association. My heart sank. With a sense of grim foreboding, I peeled them off the door and sat down at my kitchen table to perform the autopsy on my good mood. Each envelope contained a separate, official notice of covenant violation. And each one came with a fine. The first one was for improper storage of a garbage receptacle. According to Bylaw 7, Section C, garbage cans could not be visible from the street for more than 12 hours before or after the designated pickup time. I had apparently rolled mine to the curb at 7 p.m. the night before pickup, a full 2 hours early. A heinous crime. The fine was $25. The second notice was for lawn height irregularity. A photo, clearly taken from a low angle to be as unflattering as possible, showed a single, defiant dandelion puff, rising slightly above the rest of my lawn. It was a violation of the aesthetic uniformity clause. Fine. $50. The third was my personal favorite. Unauthorized exterior apparatus. It cited a rule against satellite dishes and antennas. The accompanying photo, clearly taken with a powerful zoom lens, showed the small, unassuming weather sensor I had mounted to my chimney. Fine. $100. The fourth and fifth were a matched set of pure vindictiveness. One was for unauthorized commercial vehicle, citing Frank's work van being parked in my driveway. The other was for excessive noise during restricted hours, for the sound of his crew's drills. Both carried a $75 fine. Total damages from my victory over Carol, $325. It was a declaration of war. A volley of paper-cut stings designed to bleed me dry, and make me regret the day I had ever dared to challenge her authority. My initial amusement quickly curdled into a hot, simmering anger. This wasn't about rules. This was a personal attack. This was retaliation, pure and simple. I stared at the notices, at the neat, passive-aggressive, typewritten words, and I realized I had two choices. I could write a check for $325, tuck my tail between my legs, and spend the rest of my days living in fear of Carol's ruler and camera. I could accept her reign of terror and pray I didn't leave my garden hose uncoiled for 5 minutes too long, or I could fight. I thought about the way she had looked at me as she was forced to stand down. The pure, undiluted hatred in her eyes. This wasn't going to stop with $325. This was her new hobby. She would watch my every move, documenting every minor infraction, until she either drove me out of the neighborhood or into bankruptcy. I stood up and walked over to my new server rack, its lights blinking in a steady, reassuring rhythm. This was my home. I had worked too hard for it. I had fought off a literal power-mad despot to bring it to life. I wasn't about to let her win with 1,000 petty cuts. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the folder labeled Closing Docs. I had a lot of reading to do. If Carol wanted to play by the book, then I was going to become a goddamn librarian. That afternoon, armed with a fresh batch of iced tea and a burning sense of injustice, I decided to take a walk. It was a reconnaissance mission. I needed to know the lay of the land, to see if I was a lone soldier or if there were other prisoners of war in this pastel-colored gulag. I started with the house next door, home to a quiet, elderly couple. The Hendersons, no relation to the supervisor, a fact I quickly clarified. Mr. Henderson was out trimming his rose bushes with the kind of meticulous care usually reserved for brain surgery. "Afternoon," I said, leaning on the fence that separated our properties. He looked up, a gentle smile on his face. "Ah, the young man who brought the thunder yesterday. That was quite the spectacle." "You saw that?" I asked. "Oh, the whole street saw it," he chuckled. "It was the most exciting thing to happen on Serenity Lane since Mrs. Gable's poodle escaped in 08. "Well, the thunder brought lightning," I said, holding up the stack of violation notices. 5 of them. Apparently my lawn is a menace to society." Mr. Henderson's smile vanished. He sighed and set down his shears. "Ah, the morning after mail. I know it well. Last month, Brenda got a fine because one of her garden gnomes was deemed excessively whimsical." He gestured to a small, cheerful gnome hiding behind a rose bush. We had to move him out of the direct line of sight from the street. We talked for another 20 minutes. He told me stories of Carol's reign of terror, how she had measured the exact shade of white of another neighbor's fence paint to ensure it complied with the approved color palette, how she had tried to ban children from playing on their own lawns during certain hours to preserve the tranquility of the neighborhood. The Hendersons, like many others, had simply given up fighting. It was easier to pay the small, absurd fines than to endure the constant harassment. My next stop was across the street, where a young family, the Garcias, were trying to teach their toddler how to ride a tricycle on the sidewalk. I introduced myself, and after a few minutes of small talk, I mentioned the violation notices. Maria Garcia rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. "Tell me about it. We got one last week because our daughter's big wheel was left in the driveway overnight. Apparently, it counts as an unregistered vehicle." It was the same story at every house I visited, a litany of petty tyrannies. Fines for holiday decorations left up a day too late. Warnings about the wrong type of mulch. A culture of fear and resentment had taken root in Serenity Lane, all cultivated by one woman with a clipboard and a bottomless well of spite. They had all seen what happened at the substation. They had seen Carol get put in her place, and it had sparked something in them, a tiny, flickering ember of hope. But they were too beaten down, too used to defeat, to fan it into a flame themselves. That's when I realized what I had to do. I wasn't just fighting for my own right to have a non-regulation weather sensor. I was fighting for the Hendersons' gnome, for the Garcias' big wheel, for the soul of the entire neighborhood. I, Alex Miller, the quiet IT guy who just wanted to be left alone, had been unwittingly cast as the leader of the revolution. That evening, I sent out a mass email to every address I had managed to gather. Subject: a quick question for my neighbors. Hi everyone. You may know me as the guy whose smart home installation caused a bit of a scene yesterday. You may also know me as the guy who woke up to $325 in highly questionable HOA fines this morning. It's come to my attention that this might be a common experience around here. The next HOA meeting is in 1 week. I plan on attending and addressing my violations. I also plan on bringing a few things to the board's attention. If anyone else feels like the HOA bylaws are being creatively interpreted, perhaps we could all attend together. There's strength in numbers. Just a thought. Best, Alex. 12 Serenity Lane. The house with the allegedly illegal weather sensor. I hit send and leaned back in my chair. The ball was in their court. I had no idea if anyone would respond, but for the first time I felt like I wasn't alone. The resistance had begun. The Serenity Lane Community Center was exactly as depressing as I had imagined. It was a single, cavernous room, with beige walls, a linoleum floor that was perpetually sticky, and the faint, lingering smell of stale coffee and shattered dreams. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a pallid, unflattering glow on the 20 or so residents scattered amongst the folding metal chairs. At the front of the room, behind a long folding table, sat the HOA board. There were 4 of them, 2 elderly men who looked half asleep, a nervous-looking woman who kept fiddling with her nameplate, and, in the center seat, Her Royal Highness, Carol. She presided over the meeting with the smug gravity of a queen addressing her court. I took a seat in the back row. I wasn't alone. To my right sat Mr. Henderson, clutching a file folder containing a detailed history of the gnome controversy. To my left were the Garcias, who had brought a photo album filled with pictures of other children's toys left in other driveways. In the rows in front of me, I saw at least a dozen other faces I had spoken to over the past week. My email had worked. The resistance had shown up. We sat through an hour of mind-numbing minutiae, a debate over the budget for new petunias for the front entrance, a report from the Architectural Review Committee, which was just Carol, and a lengthy discussion about a proposed rule change regarding the acceptable shades of gray for mailbox posts. Finally, the moment arrived. Carol cleared her throat and picked up a stack of papers. We now move to the review of recent covenant violations, she announced, a predatory gleam in her eye. First on the docket, Mr. Alex Miller of 12 Serenity Lane. All heads turned to look at me. I took a deep breath, picked up the thick binder I had spent the last week compiling, and walked to the front of the room. I felt like a lawyer about to give his closing argument. Mr. Miller, Carol began, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. It appears you've had some trouble adjusting to our community standards. You have 5 outstanding violations. She started with the garbage can. A clear violation of Bylaw 7, Section C. The fine of $25 stands. Actually, Carol, I said, opening my binder to the first tab. If you'll refer to the minutes from the May 2019 HOA meeting, you'll see a motion was passed to amend that bylaw. Due to residents' work schedules, the window was extended to 24 hours. I have a copy of the minutes right here, signed by the then secretary. You, as it happens. I slid a copy across the table. Carol's face twitched. The nervous woman on the board peered at the paper and nodded slowly. He's right. I moved on. Regarding the lawn, I continued, I have here a notarized statement from a professional landscaping company certifying that my lawn was, at the time of the alleged violation, well within the height regulations. They also noted that dandelions are, botanically speaking, an herbaceous perennial, not a structural flaw. Next, the satellite dish. This is a weather sensor. The bylaws explicitly prohibit reception antennas, like satellite dishes. They say nothing about data-transmitting sensors. If you'd like to propose a new bylaw to ban the monitoring of meteorological conditions, I'm sure we could put it to a vote. The final two, the contractor violations, were my masterpiece. As for the commercial vehicle and the noise, I direct your attention to the Home Improvement Clause of the covenants. It grants a temporary 72-hour exemption from those specific rules for any homeowner engaged in a pre-approved architectural modification. And I have here my application for the installation of my new server closet, which was approved by the Architectural Review Committee, that is to say, you, Carol, 3 weeks ago. I placed the approved application, complete with her signature, on the table. A collective gasp went through the room. It was a checkmate. I had systematically, legally, and publicly dismantled her entire case against me. Carol was sputtering, her face a kaleidoscope of rage and disbelief. But I wasn't finished. And now, I said, turning to a new section of my binder, I'd like to file a few complaints of my own. The mood in the room shifted from tense to electric. First, I announced, projecting a photo onto the pull-down screen I had requested earlier. It was a crystal-clear, time-stamped photo of Carol's house. I'd like to report a violation of Bylaw 8 regarding mailbox maintenance. As you can see, the flag on this mailbox was left in the up position for more than 48 hours, a clear and flagrant disregard for the rules. Another picture flashed on the screen. Furthermore, I have here a decibel meter reading, taken from the edge of my property line, showing that Miss President's wind chimes regularly exceed the 50 decibel noise limit after 9 p.m. I clicked again. A close-up of her driveway appeared. And finally, a violation of the Property Maintenance Clause. A crack in the driveway, clearly longer than the regulation 6 inches. A hand shot up in the front row. It was Maria Garcia. I'd like to file a complaint, she said, her voice ringing with newfound courage. Carol's dog has been digging under our shared fence. Mr. Henderson stood up. Her sprinkler system consistently oversprays onto my prize-winning roses. Suddenly, it was a flood. The dam of fear had broken. For the next 10 minutes, the residents of Serenity Lane, one by one, stood up and aired their grievances, years of pent-up frustration pouring out. It was a glorious, chaotic, and beautiful revolt. Carol sat in stunned silence, her face ashen. The other board members were looking at her not with support, but with alarm. They were rats on a sinking ship, and Carol was the anchor. Finally, Mr. Henderson, his voice calm but firm, spoke into the chaos. I believe it's clear that our current president has lost the confidence of this community. I'd like to make a motion for an immediate vote of no confidence and her removal from the board. The nervous woman seconded it immediately. All in favor? Mr. Henderson asked. A forest of hands shot up, including the 2 other board members. It was nearly unanimous. Carol stared out at the sea of hands, her face a mask of utter defeat. She stood up, knocking over her chair, and without a word turned and fled the room. The room erupted in applause. A week later, I was sitting in my perfectly climate-controlled office, the server rack humming its quiet, reassuring song. My smart home was a symphony of efficiency, a testament to the battle I had won. I took a sip of my coffee and looked out the window. A large yellow moving truck was parked in front of Carol's house. Movers were carrying out boxes and furniture. As I watched, Carol herself emerged from the house. She was wearing a plain, gray sweatsuit, a pale imitation of her usual power tracksuit. She looked smaller, diminished. She happened to glance across the street and saw me in the window. Our eyes met for a moment across the manicured lawns. She gave me one last withering glare, a final, impotent shot of venom. Then she turned, got into the passenger seat of her car, and didn't look back. The car pulled away, followed by the moving truck, and just like that, the reign of terror was over. The neighborhood felt different in the days that followed. Lighter. People were talking to each other more, smiling. Kids were playing in the streets. Mr. Henderson was elected the new, reluctant HOA president, and his first official act was to declare a moratorium on all fines for a month to allow for a period of community healing. He also sponsored a motion to officially classify garden gnomes as protected works of art. It passed unanimously. That evening, I got a text. It was from Frank. It was a picture of a six-pack of craft beer sitting on his workbench. The caption read, "To the man who fought the law and won. First round's on me next time I'm in the neighborhood." I smiled and grabbed a beer of my own from my perfectly chilled smart fridge. I walked out onto my back porch and sat down, looking out at the quiet, peaceful neighborhood. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The air was filled with the sound of crickets and the distant laughter of the Garcia kids. It was everything I had wanted when I bought this house. Peace, quiet, a place to call my own. I had just had to go to war to get it. I leaned back in my chair, took a long, satisfying sip of my beer, and thought to myself, and they say you can't fight City Hall. Turns out you just have to read the fine print,